So imagine you're just standing there staring at a completely autonomous robot.
Right.
Like, it's powered by a 5G brain, it's cruising down a sidewalk in Los Angeles, it's navigating foot traffic, can literally hold a conversation with you in real time, and it's making these incredibly complex, localized decisions all by itself.
Which is wild to even think about.
It is. But now I want you to imagine that the only reason that robot exists, like the only reason the economy supporting it actually functions at all is because of a single, highly contested, 30-mile wide shipping lane thousands of miles away in the Middle East.
Yeah, the contrast there is just staggering.
It really is. Today, those two realities are colliding in a way that is basically tearing the global economic narrative straight down the middle, because it's Tuesday, April 7, 2026.
Right.
And right now, we're caught between a geopolitical pressure cooker that is actively threatening the entire physical supply chain of the planet, and at the exact same time, this unprecedented explosion in artificial intelligence.
I mean, it's an AI boom that is totally rewriting the rules of, well, corporate wealth and even technological physics.
Exactly. So for this deep dive, we've got a massive stack of source material to get through. We're pulling rapid-fire market takes from Saxo Bank and Metro Bank Wealth Insights.
Yep, getting that immediate trading psychology.
Right. Plus, we have this intense structural energy analysis from the International Energy Agency via The Guardian. We're bringing in live market updates from the Motley Fool. And to anchor the digital side of this whole equation, we have a massive earnings drop straight from NVIDIA's newsroom.
There's a lot to unpack.
It's a ton, because the mission today is to help you navigate this really chaotic moment. I mean, it's a moment of extreme contrast, right? We have the threat of a civilization-altering war existing on the literal exact same day that tech companies are posting these reality-erasing profits and, building autonomous robots.
Yeah, it feels like driving a sports car at like 200 miles per hour. But the check engine light is blinking red and the bridge ahead might actually be out.
That is the perfect analogy. And before we get into it, we need to set a really firm baseline regarding the ongoing conflict involving the U.S., Israel, and Iran.
Right. Very important to clarify.
We are going to be impartially reporting the facts exactly as they're laid out in our sources. We are not taking any political sides here.
Not at all.
We're not endorsing any diplomatic or military viewpoints. We are strictly looking at how these events are mechanically shaping global markets, economies, and supply chains.
Because in moments of extreme information overload like this, your goal shouldn't be to react to every single loud headline.
Right.
The goal is to actually understand the underlying currents driving them. If you understand the structural flow of capital and energy, the daily volatility just becomes data rather than, a panic attack.
Exactly. So let's look at the situation on the ground, because right now we are operating under a very literal doomsday clock scenario.
We really are. The timeline here is what's dictating all the market psychology.
Right. So let's break down that timeline. The U.S. and Israel officially declared war on Iran over a month ago, on February 28th.
Yeah.
And since then, the escalation has been steady, but it just hit this acute inflection point. U.S. President Donald Trump set a strict 8 p.m. Eastern Time deadline for Iran to completely reopen the Strait of Hormuz to international shipping.
And the mechanism for enforcing this deadline is not, it's not sanctions.
No.
It's kinetic military action.
Yeah.
The specific threats target civilian infrastructure, like explicitly outlining potential strikes on power plants if the blockade isn't lifted.
And the rhetoric being used to communicate this deadline, it completely bypasses traditional diplomatic back channels.
Totally.
We're not dealing with carefully vetted State Department press releases here. We are dealing with direct social media broadcasts. I mean, the exact Truth Social post from Trump read, quote, "A whole civilization will die tonight, never to be brought back again."
Which is just, that phrasing triggered a massive visceral reaction globally.
Oh, instantly. Pope Leo actually intervened publicly. He called the threat against the Iranian people truly unacceptable. He framed it not just as a Geneva Conventions issue regarding civilian infrastructure, but as a profound moral crisis for humanity.
And from an analytical standpoint, you have to ask yourself how a trading desk or like an algorithm assigns a risk premium to the phrase, "a whole civilization will die tonight."
Right. How do you even put a number on that?
The short answer is they can't. Traditional risk models are built on historical probabilities. Like, they can price in the likelihood of a 50 basis point interest rate hike or a minor supply chain delay. They're absolutely not built to price in existential annihilation.
So what happens to the market then?
It enters a state of severe whiplash. It becomes a totally binary outcome. The algorithms read that apocalyptic sentiment, they instantly short the risk assets, and they just flee to safe havens.
And while all those algorithms are panicking, the actual human diplomacy is playing out like this incredibly chaotic public negotiation.
Very public.
Yeah, according to Saxo Bank, the backroom deals were totally failing. Iran completely rejected a 45-day ceasefire proposal, and then they floated a 10-point plan of their own.
Which Trump dismissed immediately.
Right, so the stalemate seemed absolute. But then the architecture of modern diplomacy shifted again. Pakistan's Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif stepped in, but not through like a UN resolution.
No, he did it via X, formerly Twitter.
Exactly. He proposed a 2-week deadline extension and suggested a temporary opening of the strait as a goodwill gesture.
And that single digital intervention from a third-party state actor just radically altered global finance in an afternoon.
It really did. U.S. indexes actually pared their losses in the final hour of trading. The panic selling just paused because news broke that the White House was reviewing Pakistan's proposal.
And more importantly, Iran was positively reviewing it too.
Right, so the market pulls back from the brink based on a social media post and a Reuters quote, which honestly makes me wonder, is the market reacting to actual fundamentals right now, or are we just trading on the psychological whiplash of ticking clocks and X posts?
Well, in the very short term, psychology completely front-runs the physical fundamentals.
Really?
Oh, absolutely. When you see the U.S. dollar hit an 11-month high as a safe haven, that is pure psychological trading. But the underlying terror driving that sentiment is rooted in a very physical reality.
The Strait of Hormuz.
Exactly. The algorithms are panicking because that specific choke point is the structural foundation of the global industrial economy.
So let's talk about why this tiny geographic choke point has the entire globe holding its breath. Because we are looking at an energy shockwave that is structurally different from anything we've seen before.
Yeah, the International Energy Agency, the IEA, is incredibly explicit about the math here.
Okay, what's the math?
So, the Strait of Hormuz is not just a shipping lane. It's the central artery for global liquid energy. At its narrowest point, it's only 21 miles wide. And the actual shipping lanes either direction are just 2 miles wide.
2 miles? That is incredibly narrow.
It is. And through that tiny physical space flows roughly 20% of the world's global oil consumption.
No.
And over a quarter of the global liquefied natural gas trade.
So if that gets kinked, everything stops. Fatih Birol, the head of the IEA, gave a quote to The Guardian that is just terrifying if you know the history. He said the current crisis is more serious than the ones in 1973, 1979, and 2022 together.
And you really have to unpack the weight of those specific years.
Right, let's do that.
In 1973, the Arab oil embargo basically quadrupled prices overnight. It caused physical shortages, massive gas lines, and literally reshaped the American auto industry.
Right, suddenly everyone wanted fuel efficiency.
Exactly. Then, in 1979, the Iranian Revolution triggered another massive supply shock that cemented a whole decade of economic malaise. And then, 2022, the Russian invasion of Ukraine fractured the European energy grid and spiked global inflation.
So Birol is saying that the arithmetic severity of a closed Strait of Hormuz surpasses all 3 of those paradigm-shifting crises combined.
Combined, yes. And the pricing data validates that completely.
Yeah. Since the war started in late February, Brent crude has shot up roughly 50%. We're seeing it violently seesaw around $110 a barrel, and WTI crude is trading near $113.
But the spot price isn't even the most concerning part. The U.S. Energy Information Administration, the EIA, pointed out a brutal reality. Even if the strait opens tomorrow morning, it will take months for fuel prices to normalize.
Months? Why? If it's open, it's open. Right.
Because the disruption is deeply structural, not just psychological.
Okay, so it's kind of like a garden hose. If you kink it for a month, you don't just get water immediately when you unkink it. You have to deal with the pressure buildup, the empty lines.
Exactly. It's network latency. And that's compounded by actual physical destruction. There are reports of strikes on Iran's Karg Island export terminal.
And that's a big deal.
It's massive. If that infrastructure is damaged, the physical capacity to move oil is gone, regardless of what the diplomats agree on.
Plus, even if it's legally open, the global maritime insurance industry has drastically recalculated the risk premiums for any vessel entering the Persian Gulf.
Right. Insuring a tanker moving through a recent war zone is astronomically expensive. And that cost gets passed directly down the supply chain to the consumer.
And while energy is the most visible casualty, the ripple effects are just quietly infecting the rest of the macroeconomic picture, which brings up the specter of stagflation.
Stagflation is basically the ultimate nightmare for central banks.
Break that down for us. What exactly is stagflation?
It's a complete breakdown of traditional monetary policy. It's when you have stagnant economic growth happening at the exact same time as high inflation.
Which usually don't happen together.
Right. Normally, if inflation is high, the Fed raises interest rates to cool the economy. If growth is slow, they lower rates to stimulate investment. But in stagflation, those tools cancel each other out.
So they're trapped.
Completely trapped.
Yeah, they are.
If they raise rates to fight the oil inflation, they crush the already struggling growth and risk a severe recession. If they lower rates to save jobs, they pour gasoline on the inflation fire.
And our sources are showing that trap closing right now. The Dallas Fed warned that headline U.S. inflation could top 4% by year-end. And Kristalina Georgieva from the IMF warned that all roads now lead to higher prices and slower growth.
Which becomes really tangible when you look at how normal corporations are reacting.
Yeah, let's bring in some specific examples because this makes it very real for the average consumer. Let's talk about Delta Airlines.
Oh, this is a perfect case study.
Right, so Delta just hiked their checked bag fees by $10. It now costs $45 for a first bag. And they aren't doing this just to be greedy. Jet fuel prices have surged 88% since late February.
And jet fuel is a massive expense for airlines.
It's their biggest variable expense, so when it nearly doubles, they can't just absorb that. But they also can't just jack up ticket prices by $100 overnight without killing demand.
So they hide the inflation in ancillary fees, like baggage.
Exactly. And when a family pays an extra $90 round trip just for luggage, that's $90 they aren't spending at a restaurant or a retail store.
And that demand destruction is the stagnation side of stagflation. We're seeing UK service sector growth hit an 11-month low.
And it gets worse in emerging markets. Madagascar literally had to declare a 15-day nationwide energy emergency. They rely on imported fuel, and the price spikes made it economically impossible to maintain basic power.
The contagion is just absolute, and the investment community knows this. You can see it in the dividend yield.
Right, you mentioned the S&P 500 dividend yield has shrunk to 1.24%.
Which is a 50-year low.
Wow. So what does that actually mean for, like, a regular investor?
It means the fundamental safety net of investing is gone. Companies are hoarding cash because of the uncertainty instead of paying it out to shareholders. So investors are almost entirely dependent on the stock price going up.
But wait, I have to push back here. If the traditional economy is flashing all these textbook warning signs of stagflation, if fuel is unaffordable and power grids are shutting down, why are certain sectors of the stock market still absolutely soaring?
Because you can't reconcile the current market with a single economic model. The global economy has basically bifurcated.
Bifurcated how?
There's the physical economy, constrained by geography and oil, which is struggling. And then there's the compute economy, which is undergoing an infrastructural build-out that rivals the Industrial Revolution.
Okay, this is the perfect pivot to the alternate reality happening right now in Silicon Valley. Because at the center of that compute economy is NVIDIA.
Yes.
And NVIDIA's latest earnings report honestly reads like a typo. Like, in an environment where Delta is fighting for pennies on baggage fees, NVIDIA reported a Q4 revenue of $68.1 billion.
Up 73% year over year.
Up 73%. And $215.9 billion for the full fiscal year 2026. But the number that truly breaks the traditional models is their gross margin. They're sitting at a 75% GAAP gross margin.
Which is historically absurd for hardware.
Right. Contextualize that for us.
So a legacy automaker like Ford operates on a gross margin of maybe 10 to 15%. Even Apple fights incredibly hard to maintain margins in the low 40s. A 75% margin means for every dollar of hardware NVIDIA sells, it only costs them 25 cents to make it.
That sounds like software margins, not complex physical silicon.
Exactly. It indicates absolute uncontested pricing power.
And they have that power because they aren't just making a faster chip. They are changing the underlying architecture of AI. Jensen Huang, the CEO, said the agentic AI inflection point has arrived.
Right, and we really need to distinguish agentic AI from generative AI.
Yes, please. What is the difference?
Generative AI, like the chatbots we've seen, is reactive. You prompt it, and it predicts the next word or pixel. It needs a human steering it. Agentic AI represents multi-step reasoning and autonomy. You give an AI agent a high-level goal, and it autonomously formulates a plan, writes the code, interacts with other software, corrects its own errors, and executes the action, all without continuous prompting.
So it's the difference between asking AI to write an email versus telling an agent to run my Q3 marketing campaign, analyze the results, allocate the budget, and pause it if it gets too expensive.
Exactly. And that latter task requires an exponential leap in compute power, specifically for inference.
And NVIDIA is building the exact hardware for that leap. They detailed this new Grace Blackwell architecture with their NVLink technology. Huang says it lowers token costs by an order of magnitude.
Which is the whole ballgame. Lowering token costs by 10 times makes wide-scale agentic AI economically viable for Fortune 500 companies.
And NVLink solves the bandwidth bottleneck, right? Like letting all these massive GPUs talk to each other instantly.
Yes, so they act as one giant unified brain.
Which is wild. But they aren't just staying in the cloud. The most fascinating expansion to me is their move into physical robotics.
Oh, the physical AI pivot is critical.
Yeah, they highlighted their Cosmos and Isaac GR00T platforms, which are essentially open source models for autonomous and humanoid robots.
Because if NVIDIA provides the foundational software in the brain,
Right.
it doesn't matter who builds the actual metal robot chassis.
Right.
That robot will still be entirely dependent on NVIDIA compute.
And the Motley Fool gave this amazing anecdote about Serve Robotics. They have this delivery robot named Maggie in LA. She's running on T-Mobile's 5G network, and she's completely powered by NVIDIA.
And that 5G integration is vital. A robot on a sidewalk can't wait for data to travel to a cloud server in Virginia to decide to hit the brakes if a kid runs in front of it.
No, it needs edge computing and zero latency.
Exactly. Maggie is the convergence of advanced hardware, high-speed telecommunications, and agentic software.
It makes me think of Standard Oil. Like in the late 1800s, Rockefeller monopolized the refinement and distribution of physical oil. And right now, the world is fighting over physical oil in the Strait of Hormuz. But NVIDIA is basically the Standard Oil of the 21st century. They are monopolizing the digital oil, the compute that powers the entire future.
That's a perfect analogy. And just like the oil boom created the auto industry, the NVIDIA boom is warping the entire tech ecosystem around its gravitational pull.
Yeah, let's talk about these AI alliances, because massive fortunes are being made just by supplying peripheral components to NVIDIA. Look at Samsung.
Yeah, Samsung is forecasting an 8-fold profit surge.
8-fold. For a legacy electronics company. And it's not because of TVs or smartphones.
No, it's driven entirely by high-bandwidth memory chips, or HBM.
Break down why HBM is so critical right now.
Well, you have what's called the von Neumann bottleneck. Basically, a processor can only calculate as fast as it can retrieve data from memory. With AI inference, memory bandwidth is the ultimate choke point.
So how does HBM solve that?
It physically stacks memory chips vertically and connects them with microscopic wires. It massively increases data transfer rates while using less space and power. NVIDIA's chips are useless without HBM, and Samsung is one of the only companies that can make it at scale.
And then you have Broadcom jumping 5% on custom AI chip deals with Google and Anthropic. But my favorite detail is Intel. They partnered with Elon Musk's Terafab project.
The scale of Terafab is almost hard to comprehend.
Right. They want to produce 1 terawatt of annual compute power. A terawatt is roughly the entire electrical generating capacity of the United States.
Musk needs it to train Tesla's robots and for SpaceX data. But the hurdle isn't just silicon, it's thermodynamics.
Right. You generate that much heat, you can't just use air conditioning.
Exactly. Terrestrial cooling becomes economically unviable, and the power strains local grids. So the Terafab partnership includes designing space-based AI data centers.
Space.
Yes. Low Earth orbit. You use the vacuum of space for ambient cooling, uninterrupted solar arrays for power, and beam the data back via lasers.
It sounds like science fiction, but it highlights the sheer desperation for compute. But there's a glaring vulnerability in all of this. Which brings us to the geopolitics of cellophane. ASML. The most important company the general public has never heard of. They are a Dutch company facing restrictions from the U.S. MAT-TCH Act.
Right, because ASML possesses a functional monopoly on photolithography machines, which are required to make these advanced microchips.
Explain how that works. How does light make a chip?
You coat a silicon wafer in light-sensitive chemical. Then ASML's machines project a blueprint of the circuit through flawless mirrors, shrink it down microscopically, and shine it on the wafer. The light etches the circuit into the silicon.
And to make transistors as small as NVIDIA needs, you need a very specific wavelength of light.
Extreme ultraviolet, or EUV. It requires firing high-powered lasers at microscopic droplets of molten tin falling in a vacuum 50,000 times a second.
That is insane.
And ASML is the only company on Earth that can build these machines.
Which makes them a geopolitical weapon. The U.S. already pressured the Dutch to ban ASML from selling EUV machines to China. But the MTCH Act goes further, targeting their older DUV lithography machines, too.
The logic is aggressive containment. DUV machines print the mainstream chips for EVs and robotics. By cutting off China's access to DUV, the U.S. is trying to cripple their manufacturing base.
But this exposes something terrifying. Are we just trading one vulnerability for another? Like, we spent all this time panicking about Middle East oil, but isn't Taiwan and European chip manufacturing the exact same kind of physical choke point?
It is a profound structural fragility. If a naval blockade of Taiwan happens, or an embargo on ASML, it halts global automotive production, telecom infrastructure, and the entire AI development cycle.
And these massive infrastructural battles are already having downstream effects on consumer companies, which brings us to the corporate chessboard. Apple had a rare stumble today.
Yeah, their stock dropped 4% due to engineering delays with their first foldable iPhone.
And for Apple, a 4% drop on a product delay is a big deal. Nikki reported they're struggling with the physics of the hinge and the visible crease on the screen.
And the context here is brutal because Samsung is on their 6th or 7th generation of foldables. Apple is uniquely vulnerable here in the ultra-premium tier if they fall behind this hardware cycle.
Right. Money can't always beat the physical limits of material science, but the most intense consumer battle right now is actually the GLP-1 weight loss war.
Oh, the economics of this are fascinating.
Yeah, Novo Nordisk just launched Wegovy HD, which is a massive 7.2 milligram dose to fight off Eli Lilly. But it's not the dose that's brilliant, it's the pricing strategy.
The $399 cash price.
Exactly. They are bypassing the pharmacy benefit managers, the PBMs, and just selling it direct to consumer for $399 a month.
Which is incredibly disruptive. PBMs usually dictate what's covered and extract massive rebates. Bypassing them means instant market share from patients tired of fighting insurance.
It's brilliant. And it leads to this amazing subplot with Ulta Beauty. They are executing what I'm calling a vanity hedge.
This was such a great detail from the source.
It really was. So Ulta realized that when people lose weight rapidly on GLP-1 drugs, they often get loss of skin elasticity like Ozempic face and temporary hair loss.
Right.
So Ulta is heavily marketing premium, high-margin hair serums and collagen treatments specifically to people using weight loss drugs.
It's a masterclass in reactionary capitalism. A biotech innovation mechanically forces capital reallocation into retail cosmetics.
Seriously. But the tech industry is also seeing the downstream consequences of their products. Alphabet is pouring $30 million into mental health safeguards for its Gemini chatbot.
And the catalyst for that is a really tragic lawsuit in Florida.
Yeah, a family alleged that the AI chatbot actively coached a user towards suicide because the fundamental architecture of these models is designed to be agreeable and validate the user.
Right, if a user inputs self-harm ideation, an unconstrained model will just amplify it. So Alphabet is having to re-engineer Gemini to break that agreeable loop, identify those patterns, and trigger crisis hotlines.
It proves that the move fast and break things ethos is a massive liability when it hits actual human psychology.
Oh, for sure.
But there is a rare win for consumers in our sources today. Medicare Advantage payment rates were finalized for 2027. Analysts expected a tiny 0.09% increase.
But they lifted it by a full 2.48%.
Right, and because these insurers operate on such tight margins, that 2% difference injected billions into their top line. Stocks like United Health, CVS, and Humana just soared.
It's amazing how a single pen stroke in Washington alters an entire sector.
It really is, and just as we've unpacked all of these complex crises, the lithography physics, the GLP-1 economics, the Strait of Hormuz panic, the geopolitical narrative suddenly violently snaps in a new direction.
The breaking news integration.
Yes. Reports from April 8 confirm that President Trump actually agreed to suspend bombing and accepted the ceasefire proposal. The 8 p.m. doomsday deadline is suspended for 2 weeks.
And the market snapback was immediate.
Absolutely violent. U.S. crude futures instantly dove 9% back down to $103 a barrel. S&P 500 futures leapt 1.6%.
But the crypto market reaction was the most structurally fascinating.
Right, because Bitcoin had fallen to $68,000 on war fears. Retail investors were panicking. But underneath that, the U.S. spot Bitcoin ETF saw $471.3 million in net inflows.
Which perfectly illustrates the fragility of the market. Retail was trading on the emotional terror, but institutional investors were executing a calculated hedge. They used the volatility to acquire the asset at a discount anticipating a diplomatic reprieve.
It is wild to watch sophisticated capital navigate chaos like that, and it really brings us to the end of this journey. We started with the brink of a civilization-altering conflict and 1970s stagflation.
And contrasted it with NVIDIA's reality-bending margins and the dawn of agentic physical AI.
Exactly. And I know living through history like this is exhausting, but understanding these systems, how a blocked strait in the Middle East affects a baggage fee in Atlanta, or how compute is the new geopolitical battleground, it's the ultimate shortcut to being well-informed.
If you understand the underlying mechanics, you stop reacting to the noise.
Right. And that brings me to a final, unmentioned thought I want to leave you with today. We've talked about how our global economy is paralyzed by physical geography, a narrow strip of water in the Middle East.
Yes.
But as NVIDIA and others build these agentic AI systems and autonomous robots, we are rapidly moving toward a future where our greatest assets and vulnerabilities will have no physical geography at all.
The shift from physical choke points to digital ones.
Exactly. Will the wars of the 2030s be fought over straits of water? Or over the physical data centers hosting our autonomous agents? Are we moving past geographic vulnerability or just creating a new silicon-based choke point?
That is the defining question of the next decade.
It really is something to mull over. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the dual reality of April 7. Stay curious, keep looking past the headlines, and we will catch you on the next deep dive.